Sandra Whitmore had been president of the Emerald Shores Homeowners Association for 9 years when she confronted a black man on the beach and set in motion a lawsuit that would cost her personally $2.3 million and the HOA an additional $6 million. She was 62 years old, experienced enough to understand property rights and trespassing law, but apparently convinced that her judgment about who belonged on her beach was infallible. One Saturday afternoon in July, on a private Atlantic coastline, she saw a black man in swim trunks walking toward the water, carrying a beach chair, and decided he was trespassing. The man was Associate Justice Marcus Thompson, a member of the United States Supreme Court who'd purchased a 4,800 square foot beachfront home on that exact stretch of sand 6 years earlier. What Whitmore did next, refusing to verify his credentials, ignoring his key card, and calling police with false claims of aggressive behavior, would become proof of how racial assumptions override evidence, credentials, and basic common sense, and it would destroy her financially, legally, and socially in a community that suddenly couldn't distance itself from her fast enough. A black man in his early 60s, Justice Marcus Thompson, was walking across the pristine white sand of Emerald Shores Beach, carrying a folding chair and a book. His beach access key card hung visibly on a lanyard around his neck. No crime, no trespassing, no violation. Just a homeowner heading to the water on a Saturday afternoon. But Sandra Whitmore saw him through assumptions so rigid that she couldn't process a black man as a legitimate resident of her exclusive beach community, much less as one of the 9 most powerful jurists in the United States. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Emerald Shores is a gated beachfront community on the northern coast of South Carolina, about 40 minutes north of Charleston. Think sprawling oceanfront estates, private beach access, and property values that start at $2 million and climb quickly from there. The homes sit on half-acre lots with direct beach access through a series of private walkways, white picket fences, perfectly manicured lawns, American flags flapping in the salt breeze. The demographic is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly wealthy, and overwhelmingly insular. Residents know each other. They golf together, attend the same country club, send their grandchildren to the same private schools. It's the kind of community where everyone recognizes everyone else's face, where newcomers are noticed immediately, and where anyone who doesn't fit the unspoken profile stands out. That Saturday afternoon in July was perfect beach weather. Clear blue sky, temperature in the mid-80s, a gentle breeze coming off the Atlantic. The tide was going out, leaving smooth, wet sand, perfect for walking. Families had claimed spots along the beach. Kids were building sandcastles. Couples walked hand in hand near the waterline. It was 2:45 p.m. The beach was busy but not crowded. Private property, monitored access, the kind of place where residents felt safe, entitled, and absolutely certain about who belonged. Sandra Whitmore had been sitting under an umbrella near the main beach access point, reading a magazine and watching the comings and goings. She'd positioned herself there deliberately, as she often did on weekends, serving as an unofficial gatekeeper. She liked knowing who was on her beach. She liked the feeling of authority that came with being HOA president. She liked being able to challenge people who looked out of place. And when Justice Marcus Thompson walked past her carrying his beach chair, Sandra Whitmore decided he was someone who didn't belong. Marcus Elliott Thompson had spent 38 years building a legal career that culminated in his appointment to the United States Supreme Court. Born in Birmingham, Alabama, in 1962, he'd grown up during the Civil Rights Movement, watching his parents participate in marches and voter registration drives. His father was a high school principal. His mother taught 3rd grade. They raised him with an absolute conviction that education was the path to power, and that power, used correctly, could change systems. Thompson attended Morehouse College on a full academic scholarship, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in political science. He went straight to Yale Law School, where he served as an editor of the Yale Law Journal and graduated in the top 5% of his class. After law school, he clerked for a federal appellate judge, then joined a prestigious Washington, D.C. law firm specializing in constitutional law. He worked there for 8 years, building a reputation for meticulous legal writing and oral arguments that combined intellectual rigor with emotional resonance. At 33, Thompson left private practice to become a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. He spent 6 years prosecuting hate crimes, police misconduct cases, and voting rights violations. His colleagues described him as relentless, detail-oriented, and absolutely committed to equal justice under law. At 39, he was appointed to the Federal District Court in South Carolina. At 48, he was elevated to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. And at 56, President Obama nominated him to the Supreme Court, where he was confirmed by a vote of 68 to 32. Justice Thompson was known for his methodical approach to constitutional interpretation, his clear writing style, and his willingness to ask pointed questions during oral arguments. He'd authored major opinions on voting rights, criminal justice reform, and civil rights protections. Legal scholars described him as one of the court's most thoughtful voices on issues of race and equality. He'd received honorary degrees from 14 universities. He'd been named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. He'd testified before Congress, lectured at law schools around the world, and written 2 books on constitutional law. And that Saturday afternoon, Justice Marcus Thompson was doing something completely ordinary, walking to the beach at his own home. He'd purchased the Emerald Shores property 6 years earlier for $3.2 million. A 4-bedroom, 4,800 square foot home with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean, a wraparound deck, and direct beach access. He'd chosen South Carolina because it was his appellate circuit, because the beaches were beautiful, and because it was far enough from Washington to feel like an escape. He'd completed all the HOA paperwork, paid his annual dues of $8,500, received his beach access key card, and attended exactly 1 HOA meeting before deciding that Sandra Whitmore's approach to governance was something he preferred to avoid. He kept to himself. He came down from Washington once a month when the court wasn't in session, usually alone, sometimes with his wife when her schedule allowed. He walked the beach every morning. He read on his deck. He grilled fish and watched the sunset. He didn't socialize with neighbors beyond polite waves and brief hellos. He valued privacy. He valued quiet. He valued being somewhere he could think without the constant scrutiny of Washington. That Saturday, he'd arrived from D.C. at noon, unpacked his bag, changed into swim trunks and a navy blue polo shirt, grabbed a book about Reconstruction history, and headed to the beach. His key card hung on a lanyard around his neck, clearly visible. His beach chair was the same one he'd been carrying for years. He planned to read for an hour, maybe swim if the water looked warm enough, then head back to grill salmon for dinner. He walked past Sandra Whitmore's umbrella at 2:47 p.m., gave her a polite nod, and continued toward an empty spot about 50 yards down the beach. He had no idea what was about to happen. Sandra Whitmore had been president of the Emerald Shores Homeowners Association for 9 years. 9 years of enforcing rules, managing disputes, and maintaining what she called the character and standards of the community. She was 62 years old, retired after a 30-year career in pharmaceutical sales, divorced, living alone in a 3,200 square foot home that felt emptier every year. The HOA presidency gave her purpose, gave her authority, gave her something to do besides play tennis and attend garden club meetings. But Sandra Whitmore had a documented pattern of racially biased complaints that the HOA board had ignored for years. In 2017, she'd challenged a black contractor installing a fence at a neighbor's property, demanding to see his permit and questioning whether he was actually licensed. The contractor was licensed, permitted, and hired by a white homeowner who later complained to the board about Whitmore's behavior. In 2018, she'd called the police on a black family having a barbecue at the community pavilion, claiming they were trespassing. The family were guests of a resident. The police found no violation. The family filed a complaint. The board took no action. In 2019, she'd confronted a black woman jogging on the beach path, accusing her of not living in the community. The woman was a homeowner. She showed her key card. Whitmore insisted it was fake. Another complaint to the board. Another round of nothing done. In 2020, she demanded identification from a black teenager delivering groceries to an elderly resident, blocking her car in the driveway, and threatening to call police. The teenager was the granddaughter of the resident she was visiting. In 2021, she'd reported a black man sitting in a car near the beach, access as suspicious activity. The man was a real estate agent waiting for clients to view a property. Police responded. No crime. Another complaint filed. Another board meeting where nothing changed. 5 incidents in 5 years, all involving black people, all based on assumptions that they didn't belong. All documented in HOA records that the board reviewed and dismissed as misunderstandings or excessive vigilance. The board never disciplined her. They never removed her from the presidency. They told residents to be more understanding, suggested Whitmore attend a diversity workshop that she never completed, and moved on. When Whitmore saw Justice Thompson walking toward the beach, her mind followed the same pattern it had followed 5 times before. Black person in a place where she expected to see white people equals someone who doesn't belong. She watched him for about 30 seconds, trying to place his face. She didn't recognize him. She knew all the regular residents. She definitely would have remembered a black man. This had to be someone who snuck through the gate, someone taking advantage of lax security, someone who needed to be confronted and removed. She stood up, left her umbrella, and walked after him. Do you think HOA presidents should face personal liability for racially motivated harassment of residents? Drop your answer below. Sandra Whitmore caught up with Justice Thompson as he was setting up his beach chair about 60 feet from the waterline. You need to leave this beach immediately. Thompson looked up, genuinely confused. He'd been arranging his chair, testing the sand to make sure it was stable. Excuse me? This is a private beach. Residents only. You're trespassing. Thompson kept his voice calm, the same measured tone he used during oral arguments when lawyers said something absurd. I am a resident. I own property here. Whitmore crossed her arms, her voice rising. No, you don't. I know everyone who lives on this beach. I've been HOA president for 9 years. You don't live here. Thompson gestured toward the row of houses behind them. I've lived here for 6 years. That's my house right there. The blue one with the white trim. Whitmore didn't even look. This is where assumptions become impenetrable. I don't believe you. Show me proof. Thompson pointed to the key card hanging around his neck. Here's my key card. Beach access. My name is on it. Marcus Thompson. Whitmore leaned forward, squinting at the card, but not actually reading it. Anyone can fake those. I need to see ID. Thompson pulled his wallet from the pocket of his beach chair, extracted his driver's license, and handed it to her. South Carolina driver's license. Address on Ocean View Drive, Emerald Shores. His photo. His name. Whitmore looked at it, then looked back at him, her expression hardening. This doesn't prove anything. You could have stolen this. You could be using someone else's credentials. A woman walking past slowed down, sensing confrontation. Thompson noticed her but kept his focus on Whitmore. Ma'am, I own property here. I've shown you my key card and my license. I'm not trespassing. Whitmore pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police right now. Thompson's voice remained calm, but the absurdity of the situation was starting to register. You're calling the police because I'm on my own beach? You're making people uncomfortable. You're being aggressive. Thompson hadn't raised his voice once. He was standing still, holding his beach chair. I'm not being aggressive. I'm standing here answering your questions. Whitmore was already dialing. Stay right there. Thompson set down his chair and folded his arms. I'm not going anywhere. This is my property. Whitmore spoke into her phone, her voice urgent, theatrical. Yes, I'm at Emerald Shores Beach. I need an officer. There's a man here who's trespassing and refusing to leave. He's being confrontational and aggressive. Thompson interrupted, raising his voice just enough to be heard. I'm Justice Marcus Thompson, United States Supreme Court. I live here. Whitmore covered the phone's speaker with her hand and glared at him. I don't care if you're the president. You don't belong here. She uncovered the speaker and continued with the dispatcher. Yes, he's claiming to be some kind of judge. He's making threats. Send someone quickly. By this point, 3 other beachgoers had stopped to watch. One of them, a man in his 40s wearing a Duke t-shirt, stepped forward. "Sandra, what's going on?" Whitmore gestured at Thompson. "This man is trespassing. He won't leave." The man looked at Thompson, then at the key card still hanging around his neck. "Does he have a key card?" Whitmore waved dismissively. "He says he does. Could be fake." The man walked closer and looked at the card. "Sandra, that's a real key card. It has his name and address on it." Whitmore's voice rose, defensive now. "You don't know that it's real." A woman in a sun hat joined them, squinting at Thompson's face with growing recognition. "Wait, are you Justice Thompson from the Supreme Court?" Thompson nodded slightly. "Yes, ma'am." The woman turned to Whitmore, her voice sharp. "Sandra, you called the police on a Supreme Court justice?" Whitmore's face flushed red, but she didn't back down. "I don't care who he says he is. I don't recognize him." The man in the Duke shirt pulled out his phone and typed quickly. "Sandra, I'm looking at his photo right now. That's him. He lives on Ocean View Drive. He's been a resident for years." Another beachgoer, an older man with white hair, walked over and stared at Thompson. Marcus Thompson. Thompson recognized him vaguely. Someone he'd seen at the country club. "Yes, sir." The man turned to Whitmore, his voice incredulous. "Sandra, he lives 3 houses down from me. I've seen him here dozens of times." Whitmore was shaking now, caught but unable to admit it. "Well, I didn't recognize him. He should have identified himself properly." Thompson's patience was thinning. "I showed you my key card and my license. You refused to accept them. What more do you want?" Before Whitmore could answer, 2 police cars pulled up to the beach access point. 2 officers climbed out and walked toward the group. Officer Daniel Hayes, a 19-year veteran of the local police department, and Officer Jennifer Rios, a 7-year veteran. They'd both responded to calls from Emerald Shores before, mostly noise complaints and minor disputes. Hayes approached Whitmore first. "Ma'am, you called about a trespasser?" Whitmore pointed at Thompson, her voice shaking with manufactured urgency. "Yes. This man refused to leave when I asked him. He was aggressive and confrontational." Hayes looked at Thompson, taking in his beach chair, his book, his calm demeanor. "Sir, do you live here?" Thompson nodded. "Yes. I own a home on Ocean View Drive. I've shown Ms. Whitmore my key card and my driver's license. She refused to accept them as proof." Hayes turned to Whitmore. "Did he show you identification?" Whitmore hesitated. "He showed me something, but I thought it could be fake." Hayes looked back at Thompson. "Can I see your key card and ID, sir?" Thompson handed them over. Hayes examined both carefully, then handed the driver's license to Officer Rios. "This address is in Emerald Shores. The key card looks legitimate." The man in the Duke shirt stepped forward. "Officer, I can confirm. He's Justice Marcus Thompson. Supreme Court. He's been a resident here for years." Hayes looked at Thompson more closely, recognition dawning. "Justice Thompson, from the Supreme Court?" Thompson nodded. "Yes." Hayes turned to Whitmore, his voice cooling significantly. "Ma'am, this man is a resident. He has valid identification. Why did you call the police?" Whitmore's voice became defensive, frantic. "I didn't recognize him. I thought he was trespassing. He was being aggressive." The woman in the sun hat interjected. "She called the police because he's black. That's the only reason." Thompson finally spoke, his voice firm but measured. "Officer, I walked onto my beach carrying a chair and a book. Ms. Whitmore confronted me, demanded proof that I live here, refused to accept my key card or my driver's license, and called the police claiming I was aggressive. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't threatened anyone. I've been standing here answering questions." Hayes looked at the small crowd that had gathered, multiple witnesses nodding in agreement. Did anyone see this man being aggressive? Silence. Several people shook their heads. The older man with white hair spoke up. "I saw the whole thing. He was completely calm. Sandra was the one yelling." Hayes turned to Whitmore. "Ma'am, did you accept his identification when he showed it to you?" Whitmore stammered. I didn't think it was real." "Why not?" Whitmore had no answer that wouldn't sound exactly like what it was. Should officers be required to receive diversity training after responding to racially motivated 911 calls? Drop your answer below. Officer Hayes pulled Whitmore aside, his voice low but firm. Ma'am, you called 911 and reported aggressive behavior when there was none. You refused to accept valid identification. That's filing a false police report. Whitmore's face went pale. I was just trying to protect the community. From what? A homeowner sitting on his own beach? Hayes walked back to Thompson. Justice Thompson, I apologize for this situation. You're obviously not trespassing. You're free to enjoy your beach. Thompson nodded but remained serious. Officer, this is the 6th time Ms. Whitmore has called the police on black people in this community. There's a pattern of racial harassment here. Hayes looked at Whitmore, then back at Thompson. Do you want to file a formal complaint? Thompson's voice was quiet but absolute. I want to file a lawsuit. Within 24 hours, video footage from multiple phones hit social media. Sandra Whitmore confronting a Supreme Court justice, demanding ID, refusing to accept it, calling the police, claiming aggressive behavior that never happened. Supreme Court justice harassed at his own beach home. Karen calls cops on SCOTUS. Justice for Being Black Homeowners Association president costs community millions after racist confrontation. The video went viral immediately. 6 million views in 48 hours. National news coverage. Civil rights organizations issuing statements. Legal experts calling it a textbook case of racial profiling. The video showed everything. A calm black man holding a beach chair. A white woman yelling and pointing. Police arriving to find absolutely no crime. Sandra Whitmore tried to issue a statement through her attorney. I made an error in judgment. I didn't recognize Justice Thompson. I was trying to protect the community. I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. The Emerald Shores HOA issued their own statement, desperate to distance themselves. The HOA does not condone discrimination of any kind. Ms. Whitmore's actions do not reflect our community values. We are conducting a full review, but the damage was done. The story wasn't just about one confrontation. It was about the 5 previous complaints against Whitmore that the HOA had ignored. It was about a system that protected a white woman's right to harass black residents over and over without consequences. Justice Thompson hired one of the top civil rights law firms in the country. The lawsuit was filed in federal court 3 weeks after the incident. The defendants, Sandra Whitmore personally, the Emerald Shores Homeowners Association, and the property management company that handled HOA affairs. The claims were extensive and devastating. Racial discrimination in housing under the Fair Housing Act, violation of civil rights under 42 U.S.C., Power of 1981 and Power of 1982, intentional infliction of emotional distress, false imprisonment through unlawful detention by police, filing a false police report with racially motivated intent, negligent retention and supervision by the HOA for failing to discipline Whitmore after 5 prior complaints, and failure to train HOA leadership on civil rights obligations. The lawsuit demanded $8.2 million in damages, $3 million in compensatory damages, $5 million in punitive damages, and $200,000 in legal fees. The HOA's attorneys reviewed the evidence and delivered their verdict: indefensible. The video was everywhere. The witnesses were credible. The prior complaints created a clear pattern. The defendant was a sitting Supreme Court justice with unimpeachable credibility. The settlement came 14 months later. The total, $8.2 million, exactly as requested. Sandra Whitmore personally paid $2.3 million. Her homeowner's insurance covered $500,000. She liquidated her retirement accounts, sold her Emerald Shores property at a loss, and filed for bankruptcy protection. The Emerald Shores HOA paid $5.9 million through a combination of insurance settlements and a special assessment that cost every property owner in the community $42,000. Property values in Emerald Shores dropped 11% within 6 months as the story made national news. The property management company contributed the remaining funds and immediately severed its contract with Emerald Shores. Sandra Whitmore was removed from the HOA presidency by a unanimous vote. Her termination letter was stark. Ms. Whitmore's pattern of racially motivated harassment, documented over 5 years and ignored by previous boards, culminated in a federal lawsuit that cost this community millions of dollars and immeasurable reputational damage. Despite repeated complaints, Ms. Whitmore continued to profile Black residents based solely on race. Her actions violated our community standards, our legal obligations under fair housing law, and basic human decency. She is permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership role and is no longer welcome at community events. Whitmore left South Carolina entirely, moving to Florida, where she issued no further statements. Should HOAs face automatic federal oversight after racially motivated harassment complaints? Let me know in the comments. Justice Marcus Thompson testified at a congressional hearing on housing discrimination 6 months after the settlement. You see, testimony was powerful, measured, and impossible to ignore. I'm a sitting justice on the United States Supreme Court. I've served on the federal bench for 18 years. I've devoted my career to upholding the Constitution and protecting civil rights. And I was harassed on my own beach, at my own home, because a woman looked at me and decided I didn't belong. He paused, letting the words settle. I showed her my key card. She said it was fake. I showed her my driver's license with my address on it. She said I could have stolen it. I told her I was a Supreme Court justice. She said she didn't care. None of it mattered because her assumptions about who belongs in her community were stronger than evidence, stronger than credentials, stronger than basic logic. Another pause. I had resources to fight back. I had legal expertise, national recognition, and the financial means to hire excellent attorneys. But what about the thousands of Black homeowners who face this same harassment without those resources? What about the Black families who are questioned in their own neighborhoods, stopped by police in their own driveways, treated as suspicious in spaces they legally occupy? He looked directly at the committee members. This wasn't an isolated incident. Ms. Whitmore had a documented pattern. 5 complaints in 5 years, all involving Black people, all dismissed by an HOA board that valued community harmony over civil rights. The system protected her until she targeted someone with the power to force accountability. The room was absolutely silent. If this can happen to a Supreme Court justice with every possible credential and protection, what happens to everyone else? Should private communities be required to report patterns of racial harassment to federal authorities? Drop your answer. This wasn't just about one HOA president calling the police. This was about how racism operates in spaces that claim to be neutral, professional, and rule-based. Sandra Whitmore saw a Black man on a beach and couldn't process him as a legitimate resident. She demanded evidence. She was given a key card, a driver's license with his address, verbal confirmation from neighbors, and multiple witnesses vouching for him. None of it was enough. Her bias was so complete that it overrode physical evidence held in her hands. The key card had to be fake. The license had to be stolen. The witnesses had to be wrong. The Supreme Court justice had to be lying. Because the alternative, that she was racially profiling a distinguished jurist at his own home, was too uncomfortable to accept. This is how racial profiling operates in everyday spaces. It's not always violent or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, polite, wrapped in the language of safety and community standards. It's a woman who sees a Black resident and assumes trespassing. It's an HOA board that receives complaint after complaint and does nothing because addressing racism is uncomfortable. It's a system that validates those assumptions until someone with power and resources fights back. Justice Thompson's career continued unaffected. He returned to the Supreme Court, wrote influential opinions, and became even more vocal about civil rights. The settlement money was substantial, but the real victory was accountability. Sandra Whitmore's career as HOA president is over. That's justice. The community paid $8.2 million. That's accountability. She was removed, banned, and forced to leave the state. That's consequence. But money and terminations don't undo the trauma of being questioned on your own beach. They don't restore the dignity of having your credentials dismissed. They don't erase the message that even being a Supreme Court justice isn't enough protection from racial bias. The real question is, what changes now? Do HOAs finally implement real accountability for racially motivated harassment? Do boards finally act on the first complaint instead of waiting for the fifth or sixth? Do we finally acknowledge that making people uncomfortable often just means existing while black, in spaces where some people think you don't belong? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Sandra Whitmore in power for 9 years, despite 5 documented complaints, if we don't address the culture that taught her to see black residents as threats instead of neighbors, then we're just waiting for the next HOA president, the next confrontation, the next lawsuit, the next viral video. Comment if you believe this should be law. Private communities that fail to address documented patterns of racial harassment face mandatory federal civil rights audits and potential loss of fair housing exemptions. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with awareness and change starts with pressure, then hit that subscribe button. We're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for the Supreme Court justices, the homeowners, the ordinary people who deserve to exist in the spaces they own without being criminalized for their race. This isn't just about one HOA president or one justice. It's about all of us and the world we're willing to accept.